Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. My guest today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware. Both of us teach primarily online these days. And I'm going to be talking to Imogen about a process that she's been using to help people be better able to regulate their nervous system, and how the process she's teaching relates to the Alexander technique, which she also teaches. So Imogen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, I think it would be good for our audience, if you explained a little bit about this idea of learning how to regulate your nervous system. I don't think that's something most people think about in those terms.
I think these terms are becoming maybe a little bit more well known, especially through all the kind of trauma awareness that's going on these days. But it's a very helpful thing for anyone who experiences stress ever. We all want a well-regulated nervous system. So regulation is the ability to recognize and modify changes to our internal state, or activation level, you might say, to maintain a balanced nervous system. So we can maybe move in and out, but we can come back to a more balanced state more easily. It's always in flux. So
okay, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Yeah. But I think it would also help our viewers and listeners if you give a short description or definition of the Alexander technique.
So a very simple way to say what the Alexander technique is that it's a process that helps us move and be in the world with more ease and presence.
So there seem like there's sort of parallel aims to these two processes, right?
Yes, I'm not sure. I've never used the word process or process for regulation. But the process of the way I teach Alexander technique, in fact, I think in the way anyone teaches Alexander technique, in the many myriad of different ways it can be taught, is helping people regulate their nervous system, even though it's not being couched in those terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about what that makes sense to me. I mean, if you think about what the Alexander, how people use the Alexander technique, and particularly the idea of Alexander technique self-directions, which are thoughts that you can put out that will improve the quality of your posture and movement, that sort of thing, that you're very much engaging the nervous system in that process. It's
it's engaged in everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, it is complete, and it requires I would say a certain understanding of how the nervous system works and what affects what and how that all plays out. So it seems to me it wouldn't be surprising that just plain old Alexander teaching might help people. But I'm guessing that, well, here's my other thought, that people who are dealing with trauma may not be at that moment really good at mobilizing their mental processes to use the Alexander technique. So it could be that some additional help might be needed. And I assume that's what you would provide.
Well, yes. And the reason I got very interested in seeing my work, to be honest, in these terms of helping people be more regulated, is because of working with a couple of clients who came to me, students who came to me, who were dealing with severe trauma actually, and found the work to be extremely helpful to them. And one in particular, Shay Seaborn, who we're actually collaborating a little bit with some programs now, but she'd always be kind of saying, oh, neuroscience backs this up. When we do this, this is because
Right.
so it was very exciting to me to see how it helped her and others. And yeah, so that's how I got started with it. But anyone who, especially chronic stress, but I think everyone knows what it's like to be stressed, especially over the last 2.5 years, that any tools that we have to help keep us in a better regulated state, that our baseline, I kind of call it our baseline level of ease, but that is more regulated than not, helps us just do everything more easily. Our reasoning is more online, or our interactions will go better. It's, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but yes.
Sure. I think
everything
most
goes better.
Alexander teachers have had that. And students who've been in stressful situations have discovered the technique can help with that. But so I'm wondering what it is that you add, I guess, to the Alexander technique that so it's some, if your work in this field is sort of Alexander technique plus, what is the plus?
So I'd say a couple of things maybe have helped me, but I would say that any Alexander teacher is probably going to be helpful to someone. However, I would say that for some people dealing with trauma, that the touch could be problematic. A lot of hands-on, which is common in a traditional Alexander technique lesson. And for others, it could be really helpful because it's going beyond the verbal and cognitive. So depending on who your student is, you may need to do more of one and less of the other. The way I really like to work, and I've been very influenced in the last few years from my studies with Mio Morales and his primal Alexander work, which he teaches, he calls them etudes. I kind of tend to call them practices in my practice.
Right.
But has lots of tools to just help people have little ways to help themselves, which it turns out are calming to the nervous system. And they're little tools that you can bring to bear at any time, in the same way that any direction or self-direction, any constructive thought can. But it gives maybe a tiny bit more than that, that it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the wherewithal to, in any situation, come up with it. You can have a little way to just practice this outside of any activity or situation you're in. But of course, when we have the chance to practice outside of something, it gives us a better ability to then be able to draw on it if you really are in a stressful situation. So I think one key thing is little bits, emphasizing that just a thought is a little drop, and it makes it safer. It's not this big, huge change. Agency, having your own sense of choice and agency is hugely important, especially for all of us, but especially for someone who's been traumatized and has felt that has been taken away from them. And so that they can bring this thoughts to bear themselves in their own time, in their own way. They don't have to. That's why I like the kind of freedom direction formulation. It's very, very light, and it's just these little tiny drops that can build up and help you feel safer and get a little bit more confident with it.
Well, I mean, I guess you could say that about any learning any Alexander technique self-direction, that it's probably going to be, and let's say you are suffering from some kind of trauma. Well, if the trauma is there all the time, I suppose something really simple like the process you described might be a better entry than maybe a classical Alexander technique direction, something along those lines, or just easier to do. We don't really need to.
Yes. I mean, I use Mio Morales's the cycle format as a first practice. I've got videos on this, he's got videos on this, other teachers have got videos on this. It's very simple. I've kind of adapted it a little bit, the way I teach it. But it gives someone something very simple but concrete to do. That it's not just like, oh, whenever you remember, you know.
Okay,
I think that piece is really helpful starting off, and probably to all of us, you know, depending on your learning style. But it's but I think especially in this situation.
Right. So I mean, my limited experience with it is that you do things like repeating a certain thought, and you would use your fingers and thumb to remind yourself how many times you're doing it. You might want to do it a dozen times, or and while you're going for a walk, or while you're in the car, or who knows, you know.
And you can make it shorter or longer depending on your situation or what you can actually tolerate, you know. Yes, and I had probably underestimated the value that it has, this very simple counting to it as well. And I think that's very steady and grounding, and also keeps you something to really kind of come back to the next number.
And there is that tactile thing. I mean, you're touching your thumb to your fingers, so there's that. But just to get back to one of the things you said earlier, for some people, touch is very problematical, and for others, it might be crucial. So since we're both teaching online these days, if you have a student or a client who's in the second category where touch would really make a big difference, what do you do in that case?
Well, I guess one, that it would be helpful to find an in-person teacher to provide that. That would be the number one thing. And there are ways of using self-touch that can be soothing and helpful. You know,
and is that what you would teach that?
And I include some of that in some of my with some of my students in some of my classes. So
and so do you consider that work the main thing you're doing, or is that a thing you're doing and you're also working with people more traditional, who come from more traditional reasons, let's say, like they want to play their violin better?
This is my main focus right now, and I'll have someone come for maybe a more traditional reason, but it turns out everyone's got stress in their life, and that might be part of whatever that pain situation or performance situation might, be. It feels like it's really an underlying part of whatever is going on. I do have a little point to make about this idea of a well-regulated nervous system, and part of it is that we can move more easily in and out. That we're not aiming to just be at this one level of ease and be at this kind of, that's not human life. It's not how we function. Some things are more stressful, and some things need more energy, and something, etc. But what we want is to be able to not get so out of whack either way, so highly kind of activated or really kind of like leading toward depression, that kind of collapsed, withdrawn state. I think most of us recognize that kind of heightened stress response, the fight or flight. And these tools really can help you calm your nervous system that's down regulating. But sometimes we need to actually get a bit of energy to calm our nervous system. Actually means to come up a little bit. Alexander is brilliant for this in whatever way you learn it. You can see that just with the postures, there's this or there's this, and Alexander helps you be more something like this in the middle. I don't want to put myself
not compressing yourself in a forward direction, or
or
pulling your shoulders back and compressing your
so it's compression, but it's going
a good thing, but you're actually compressing yourself. And it's just as I think it was John Dewey, the philosopher, said, you're in talking about Alexander technique, this is when you stand up straight or do that kind of up regulation, I guess you could say. The danger is
regulation,
but not up regulation, but you got too much of it or whatever. Then he says, well, you're just rearranging tensions from one. And what in an Alexander context, you want somewhere in the middle where you're not pulling yourself forward or backwards, you're just there. And I suppose that would, in self-regulation, that would be whatever is appropriate for what you're doing right now.
Exactly. Obviously, the tools that we teach in Alexander technique, and what I'm teaching specifically around this idea of regulation, are to help people being able to, you might call it self-regulate. They're able to manage their own nervous system to a certain extent. But I also want to point out that our nervous system is not in isolation. It's very also much dependent on our environment and the people that we are interacting with, because there's a term co-regulation. We co-regulate with each other for better or for worse. And I think Alexander technique is brilliant for this, because one, it helps you if you're with people who are dysregulated, for instance, in some way. It helps you be more aware, and that maybe you cannot just automatically take on it all, because you have some tools to calm yourself. But by doing that,
you help them.
You're actually helping the other people indirectly, potentially, and you're certainly not ramping up the situation. You're, so it's better for you and the people around you. So
I guess it's kind of an Alexander technique insight, maybe, that I think other people in other fields are aware of it, but your state, your physical or even your mental state, really affects everyone that's around you. And for good or for better or worse.
Your physical and mental state are one.
That's, Alexander would say, hey, they're just two sides of the same coin. So, but so, okay. Is there anything else you want to say about the regulation process in particular? I know you're doing some work. You're doing workshops on this online.
Yes, I've got
group classes.
Group classes online. We've got a course we call Foundations of Regulation, starting July, which we're doing a few times a year. It's a 4-week online course. I can give you the information to put in the.
Or would it be on your website?
It is on my website.
So
Yes.
I'll
Yeah.
put a link to your website and they can
Excellent.
contact you either for just
Yes.
plain old ordinary Zoom Alexander
But,
lessons or
or the,
take one of your workshops or
mhm,
explore.
yeah.
Okay, anything
So
else you want to add?
um, only that when we were chatting earlier, you were kind of talking about examples where people might be
Oh,
able to
yeah,
use
yeah.
these tools. And I'm just think that might kind of help make it a little clearer for people that one of my students, you know, who had been working, she'd learned some of these tools and she had a dentist appointment, which I think for many of us, dental appointments are not the most stress-free
Right. So,
situations.
yeah.
And for her, it could potentially be quite triggering. And, you know, she used these tools, was able to do her cycle, for instance, you know, while she was receiving her treatment, and it just really turned around that situation for her, for something where she, you know, had to kind of white knuckle it through before, whereas that was not
Right,
the case.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
That's it.
Check out the information on my website
Yeah.
if you're interested. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you,
So,
Robert.
oh, sure. So my guest has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware, but most of her work is maybe all of it is online. And if what we've been talking about intrigues you, kind of go to her website. You can find out when she's doing these workshops, or you could set up an individual lesson with her, whatever. Okay, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.